The snow had been falling since 4 in the morning. By 11, it had buried the sidewalks of Fifth Avenue under 6 inches of white silence. And Street, Patrick's Cathedral, stood in the middle of it all, like something lifted from a painting, its stone spires gray against a pale sky, its steps freshly shoveled, a long red carpet running from the doors to the curb, where 3 black limousines idled with their engines, breathing soft clouds into the cold. Daniel Hayes was standing beside the lead car, his collar turned up against the wind, watching the snow accumulate on the brim of his hat. He was not unhappy. Unhappy was not the right word. Tired, maybe. The particular tiredness that settles into a man who has been awake since 5:30, not because of anxiety but because his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, had crawled into his bed at some point in the night and slept sideways, her knees pressing into his ribs with the precise and unerring accuracy that only children seem to achieve during sleep. He had lain there listening to her breathe and staring at the ceiling until the alarm on his phone told him to get up, and he had kissed her forehead and gone to make coffee and pulled on his uniform and driven his personal car to the garage on 48th where the limousine company kept their fleet. He did not mind the work. It was steady, it paid reasonably, and it left his evenings free for Sophie. That was what mattered. A wedding on a Saturday in December was not unusual. What was unusual was the quiet. Most wedding mornings had a particular energy, florists arguing, mothers-in-law making last-minute demands, someone always running late. This morning the cathedral grounds were almost eerily still. The guests had been filing inside for the last 30 minutes. The wedding party had gone in through a side door. Daniel had checked his schedule. The bride was due to emerge and make her grand processional entrance in approximately 17 minutes. He was looking down at his phone, a message from Sophie's sitter saying Sophie had eaten her breakfast and was asking whether she could watch a movie when he heard the sound. It was faint at first. He might have dismissed it as the wind pressing through a gap in the stone. But then it came again, a low, raw sob, coming from the narrow alley that ran along the side of the cathedral between the main building and the clergy offices. He knew the layout well enough. He had parked at this cathedral a dozen times over the past 2 years. He hesitated. In his experience, wedding days contained a predictable amount of crying, and most of it was not his business. Mothers wept with pride. Bridesmaids wept from sentimentality. Once, memorably, a groom had wept in the back seat of Daniel's car for 20 minutes before pulling himself together and going inside, and Daniel had sat in the front and said nothing and handed back a bottle of water, and afterward the groom had tipped him generously, and they had never spoken of it. But this sound was different. This was not the soft overflow of happiness. This was someone breaking. He walked toward the alley. She was standing with her back against the stone wall, half hidden in the shadow of a buttress, still in her wedding dress, white silk, with a long cathedral train that was now soaking up the snow at its hem. Her veil had been pushed back from her face. Her makeup, which had presumably been perfect 40 minutes ago, was completely destroyed. She had her phone in one hand, and she was not looking at it anymore. She was simply crying with the phone pressed against her chest, her other hand gripped over her mouth as if she could contain the sound. She was, Daniel noted with the quiet precision that tended to operate in his mind during moments of stress, beautiful. Not in the polished way he might have expected from someone wearing that dress in this place, but in the way a person is beautiful when they have stopped performing and are simply present. Raw, exposed, real. He stopped a few feet away. "Ma'am," he said, quietly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up. Her eyes were dark and wet, and there was a particular expression on her face that he recognized he had seen it in mirrors. Sometimes, in the months after Claire had died. It was the expression of someone who has just understood something they cannot ununderstand. "I'm sorry," he said, when she didn't speak. "I heard. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." She laughed. It was a short, broken sound. "All right." She looked down at the phone in her hand. On the screen, visible even from where Daniel stood, was a message thread. He did not read it deliberately, but the nature of the exchange was unmistakable. The particular intimacy of the language, the timestamp suggesting it had been ongoing for weeks. "No, I'm not all right." He said nothing. Let the silence hold. "He never loved me," she said, very quietly, as if she were telling herself rather than him. He loved the company. The portfolio, the access. I think part of me knew, but I just... She stopped. Pressed the phone harder against her chest. 15 minutes. I'm supposed to walk through those doors in 15 minutes. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. The snow was still falling. Inside the cathedral, 300 guests were presumably seated in the pews, waiting. "If you want to leave," he said, "I can take you out the back. Right now. My car is 30 feet from here." He paused. "You don't have to go in there." She stared at him. "You're the driver. That's your limousine." "It is. If I get in your car and drive away, you'll lose the contract. The whole company will lose." "That's not your problem right now," he said. Simply. No drama in it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't even know your name." "Daniel Hayes. Emily Carter." She looked at the cathedral doors, then back at him. Something shifted in her face. A decision being made in real time, he could almost see it, the way you can see the exact moment a knot comes loose. "Okay," she said. "Yes, get me out of here." He did not waste another second. The back hallway smelled of old stone and candle wax. Daniel moved quickly, and Emily moved with him, gathering the train of her dress with both hands and walking on the balls of her feet. Twice she nearly slipped on the flagstone floor, and both times he put a hand under her elbow without thinking about it, steadied her, and let go. They did not speak. There was a particular wordless communication that sometimes happens between two people in a crisis. A synchrony of purpose that has nothing to do with familiarity. The service exit opened onto a narrow side street behind the cathedral. The limousine was parked at the mouth of the alley. Daniel unlocked it remotely, pulled open the rear door, and she got in, folding the enormous skirt of her dress around her with a kind of desperate practicality. He closed the door, walked around to the driver's seat, and started the engine. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. She had her phone in her lap. It was already ringing a name on the screen he couldn't read from the front. She stared at it for a moment, then turned it face down on the seat beside her. "I don't know," she said. "Just drive." So he drove. He took them west on 51st, then south on 7th Avenue, then over the bridge into Brooklyn. He did not choose a destination consciously, he simply drove the way he knew, away from Midtown, away from the concentrated weight of 300 people waiting in a cathedral for someone who was not coming. The snow had eased slightly. The streets were quiet in that muffled way that heavy snowfall creates, as though the city had wrapped itself in wool. The limousine moved through it smoothly, and in the back seat, he heard Emily Carter breathing. Then he heard her stop crying. He did not check the rearview mirror often. He had learned, in 2 years of driving people who were upset or drunk or grieving or celebrating, that the kindest thing you could offer someone in the back seat of a car was the absence of observation. So he drove, and the city rolled past the windows, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had, by circumstance or fate, stumbled into something larger than either had planned for that morning. From the back, eventually, "Is there a coffee shop?" He thought for a moment. "There's a place in Carroll Gardens. Small, family-run. They don't have a sign out front." "Yes," she said. "That." He took them over the Gowanus and down Court Street and turned onto a block he knew well. He had lived 2 streets over for 4 years, until Sophie's school had drawn him further into Cobble Hill. The coffee shop was called nothing officially, but everyone in the neighborhood knew it as Nora's, because Nora Bianco had run it for 27 years and showed no signs of stopping. The windows were fogged with warmth. Inside, he could see 3 or 4 people at small tables, none of them looking up. He went in first, which felt right, and Nora herself was behind the counter. A small woman in her 70s, with white hair pinned up and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, who looked at Daniel and then looked at the door behind him, where a woman in a wedding dress was pushing it open with her hip, and Nora Bianco said nothing whatsoever, which was one of the things Daniel had always liked about her. "Corner table," he said. Nora nodded and poured 2 coffees without being asked. They sat across from each other, Emily with the veil still pushed back over her head, the enormous white silk skirt filling half the corner. She had wiped her face on a paper napkin, and the effect was not elegant, but there was something in it that was more honest than elegance. She wrapped both hands around the mug. "You don't ask a lot of questions," she said. "Not usually. Most people would have." She stopped, started again. "The moment I came out of that alley, I expected someone to start telling me what I should do. Go back in. Think it through. Don't be impulsive. My whole life, any time I've been about to make a decision people considered unusual, someone appears and tells me to reconsider. I'm not going to tell you to reconsider." She looked at him directly for the first time since they had gotten into the car. He had eyes that were steady in a way she was not accustomed to, not flat, not unreadable, but simply still, like someone who had learned the hard way to conserve his reactions. "Were you married?" she asked. She wasn't sure why she asked it. Maybe because of the way he had said, "I'm not going to tell you to reconsider," as if he understood, from personal experience, what it meant to arrive at a decision that could not be argued with. "Yes," he said. "My wife died 3 years ago. Breast cancer." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry." Her name was Claire. She was 34. He said it without the particular heaviness that people sometimes performed around grief. He said it simply, as a fact he had made peace with, or mostly made peace with. "She's 8, and you raise her alone." "I do." Emily turned the mug slowly between her hands. "I've been in a relationship for 2 years, she said, with a man who was, apparently, primarily interested in my company's valuation. The messages I found." She paused. "He had a separate phone. I found it in his jacket when he gave it to me to hang up 3 weeks ago. I didn't look at it then, but this morning I found it again in his overnight bag. And I don't know why I looked. I think I already knew." "How long have you known?" "Not about the phone. But that something was wrong." She looked at him with slight surprise. "Longer than I want to admit." He nodded. "Did not push. You're not going to tell me I should have left sooner? Or that I should have seen the signs?" "No," he said. "Why not?" "Because you know all of that already, and it doesn't change where you are right now." She was quiet for a long time. Nora brought a plate of almond pastries without being asked, set them down without ceremony, and went back to the counter. Outside the fogged window, snow fell on Court Street in small, steady flakes. It occurred to Emily, sitting in the corner of a coffee shop in Brooklyn in a wedding dress she had not planned to sit in anywhere other than the first pew of St. Patrick's Cathedral, that she could not remember the last time a person had given her silence when she needed it rather than the architecture of advice. Her mother had advice. Her board had advice. Her communications director had advice calibrated to protect the company's reputation, which was not the same as protecting Emily. Victor had had a particular kind of advice that was retroactively recognizable as redirection, a way of steering her attention away from whatever she was thinking that inconvenienced him and toward some other consideration that suited him better. Daniel Hayes, who had known her for approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes, had said nothing since she finished speaking except "you know all of that already," and somehow that was the most useful thing anyone had said to her in months. "How did you do it?" she asked. "After Claire, how did you keep moving?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I didn't always. There were weeks where I went through the motions very badly. Sophie would ask me something at breakfast and I'd answer, and I don't think I was fully present for any of it." He turned the mug between his hands. What helped was the small things. Soup, walking her to school, reading to her at night. The routine was its own kind of structure. A pause. I don't think you recover from loss the way people describe it, like you cross a line and you're on the other side. I think you just gradually, the weight doesn't change, but you get stronger. Emily looked at him carefully. You're not trying to compare what you went through to what I'm going through. No, he said. They're not the same. Yours is different. But loss isn't a competition. He met her eyes. You lost something real today. Even if what you lost wasn't what you thought you had, you still lost the version of the future you were expecting to live. That's not nothing. She felt her eyes sting unexpectedly and looked away, out the fogged window at the snow on Court Street, and was grateful that he did not seem to notice, or, noticing, chose not to remark on it. What do you do, Emily said eventually, when you're standing at the exact center of your life, falling apart, and you have no idea what the edges look like anymore? You eat something, Daniel said, and pushed the pastry plate toward her. She laughed. It was not the broken sound from the alley. It was real. It surprised her. His phone buzzed at 12:20. He looked at it, and his face changed, not dramatically, but Emily noticed. Something in the set of his jaw. What is it? The school called. Sophie has a fever. I need to. He was already reaching for his coat. Go, she said immediately. Of course. Go. He paused. She was sitting alone in the corner of a Brooklyn coffee shop in a wedding dress, with no coat, and her phone presumably full of messages from 300 confused guests and the man she had not married. He felt the pull of competing obligations, the clean instinct of a parent against the more complicated instinct of someone who had, in the span of 3 hours, become unexpectedly responsible for another person's well-being. You could come with me, he said. If you don't want to be alone. I know how that sounds. I want to come, she said. At the same moment, they looked at each other. Okay, he said. The school nurse's office smelled of antiseptic and crayons. Sophie Hayes was sitting in a chair against the wall with her backpack in her lap and a pink sticker on her shirt that said, "Being Brave," which the nurse apparently gave to children who had received bad news with composure. She had Claire's dark hair and Daniel's eyes, and when she saw her father come through the door, she slid off the chair and walked to him with the precise directness of a child who has learned that composure is always better than panic. "Hi, Dad," she said. Then she looked past him at Emily. Emily was still in the wedding dress. She had not had time to change. She was standing in the doorway of a school nurse's office in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn, in approximately $14,000 worth of white silk, and a child with a slight fever was looking at her with the particular fearless curiosity of 8-year-olds everywhere. "Are you a princess?" Sophie asked. Emily crouched down so that she was at Sophie's eye level. "No," she said. "I'm just someone who was in the middle of fixing a big mistake." She paused. "My name is Emily. I'm Sophie." She considered this. Dad helps everyone. That's kind of his thing. Daniel put his hand on top of his daughter's head, gently. "Let's get you home." The apartment was small. It was on the 3rd floor of a brownstone on Sackett Street, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that opened into the living area, tall windows that looked onto the street. It was not the kind of place Emily Carter had been inside since college. Maybe. And standing in the doorway with her cathedral train looped over one arm, she had a sudden, disorienting awareness of how completely her understanding of domestic space had been shaped by money she had never consciously thought of as shaping anything. The apartment was full of things that were both worn and cared for. A couch that had clearly been slept on many times. Drawings taped to the refrigerator. Sophie's, unmistakably, bold and colorful, with an 8-year-old's magnificent indifference to proportion. A shelf of board games with taped-up boxes. A reading chair beside the window with a lamp tilted at the angle of sustained heavy use. On the kitchen counter, a coffee maker and a fruit bowl, and a library book about marine biology with a bookmark 3/4 of the way through. "There's sweatpants and a sweater in the hall closet," Daniel said, already moving to put Sophie on the couch with a blanket. "Second shelf. You're welcome to change if you want." She changed in the bathroom, which was narrow and clean and had a rubber duck on the edge of the tub. She put on the gray sweatpants and the oversized Fordham University sweater and put her wedding dress on a hanger on the back of the door and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. The woman looking back at her had no makeup, a veil she'd shoved into her bag, and someone else's clothes. She looked, she thought, more like herself than she had in years. When she came back out, Sophie was lying on the couch with a thermometer in her mouth and a look of deep personal suffering. And Daniel was in the kitchen. The smell of something warm, chicken broth, garlic, the particular comfort scent that Emily associated with childhood, with her mother's kitchen before everything had gotten complicated. "You're making soup," she said. "Sophie's standard sick day protocol," he said, without turning around. "Chicken soup, then board game, then sleep. She always stages a dramatic recovery around hour 4 so she can play one more round of something before bed." Sophie, from the couch. "I'm very sick." "I know," Daniel said, possibly dying. "We should probably play Scrabble. Your temperature is 99.4. "We'll see." Emily sat on the other end of the couch, and Sophie shifted her blanket to make room without being asked, which Emily found unexpectedly moving. She sat, and the apartment was warm, and the soup was beginning to smell like something deeply good, and outside the window, the snow had softened into a fine, continuous fall that turned the streetlights into halos, and she thought, "I have never felt this at home anywhere in my adult life." By 4 o'clock, it had become news. She found this out not because she had turned her phone on, she had not, but because Daniel, checking his own phone while the soup simmered, had seen a headline that had a photograph of Street Patrick's Cathedral and the words "Carter Tech CEO vanishes before altar," and had quietly placed the phone face down on the counter. She noticed. "Tell me," she said. He handed it to her. She read it with the composed expression of someone who has been prepared for a thing and finds that it is more or less as bad as expected. Then she set the phone down and was quiet for a moment. "Victor is going to issue a statement," she said. "He'll make himself the victim. He's very good at that." She paused. "His name is Victor Aldridge. We've been together since I was 34. He was," she stopped, reorganized. "He came, recommended. That was the thing I told myself. He came recommended by people I trusted, and he was charming, and he understood the business, and I thought that was enough. I thought understanding the business was the same as understanding me." She looked at her hands. "It wasn't." "No," Daniel said. "It rarely is." She looked at him. "Did you know? Claire, did she understand the business?" She wasn't sure exactly what she meant by that. She meant, "Did you know you had found the real thing, and how did you know?" He was quiet for a moment. Claire thought the business of being alive was more interesting than any company. She was a first-grade teacher. She cared about whether children were learning to read, whether they were frightened, whether they were being seen. He paused. She used to say that the most important skill in the world was paying attention to the right things. Emily looked at the board game shelf. Then at the marine biology book. Then at Sophie, who had fallen asleep with her cheek on the arm of the couch. "I need to call my board," she said. "And my legal team. And my communications director." She said it almost to herself, cataloging the machinery that would need to be set in motion. "Not today. Tomorrow. Tonight?" She hesitated. "You don't have to go anywhere tonight," Daniel said. "The couch folds out." She looked at him with something that was not quite gratitude and not quite wonder, but was somewhere between the two. "You barely know me. You're a person who's having a hard day," he said. That's enough. In the 2 weeks that followed, Emily Carter rebuilt her life with the methodical efficiency of someone who had built things before and knew that the process was both harder and more possible than it appeared. She called a board meeting on Monday. She arrived in clean clothes with her communications director beside her and told them, without drama, that her personal situation had changed, that she intended to address the matter directly and publicly, and that Carter Technology would be releasing a brief statement through the communications office and would not be fielding further questions on the subject. The board had questions. She answered the ones that mattered and politely declined the ones that didn't. What she did not tell the board was that she had spent Sunday night in a fold-out couch in a Brooklyn apartment with a child's drawing of a whale on the wall beside her head and the sound of Daniel moving quietly in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, and that she had woken up and lain there for several minutes without reaching for her phone, which was something she had not done since she was approximately 22 years old. She had lain there listening to the building creak and the street below carry on, and she had thought, "This is what ordinary mornings feel like," and she had been surprised to discover that ordinary mornings felt, from the inside, extraordinarily good. She stayed for breakfast. Sophie had eaten cereal and told Emily a very detailed story about a project at school involving seeds growing in cups, and Daniel had made coffee and stood at the counter reading something on his phone with the easy quiet of a person comfortable in his own space, and Emily had sat at the table and participated in the conversation about seeds and felt the specific bewilderment of someone realizing, quite late, that they have been living the wrong kind of life. Victor Aldridge had, as predicted, issued a statement framing himself as blindsided and heartbroken. His statement had been quoted extensively. Emily had read it once, recognized in its cadences the particular way he had always spoken to journalists, sympathetic framing, strategic vulnerability, and had felt not rage, but a clean, exhausted relief. She understood now what she had not quite understood before, that she had been lonely inside that relationship for a very long time, and had mistaken busyness for connection. She texted Daniel on the third day. "Sophie, feeling better?" The reply came 20 minutes later. She rallied by day 2. "Made me play Scrabble 4 times. I lost 3. Emily smiled at her phone in the glass office on the 42nd floor and felt something shift in her chest, small and certain, like a key turning. "I want to pay you for the fare," she wrote. "The wedding was in the contract. You lost the job because of me." His reply, "I called the company and sorted it." "Don't worry about it." "How did you sort it?" Explained the situation. "They were fairly understanding. Also, I think they liked the press." She laughed out loud. Her assistant, passing with a folder, gave her a surprised look. Over the following days, she found herself thinking about the apartment on Sackett Street more than she thought about the board or the press cycle, or what Victor was or wasn't saying to his friends. She thought about the soup and the board game shelf and Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator and the way Daniel had said, "You're a person who's having a hard day, that's enough," as if the most complicated human distress could be addressed with chicken soup and not requiring someone to explain themselves. She also thought, carefully and honestly, about what she was doing. She was the CEO of a company with 700 employees and a market cap that appeared regularly in financial publications. She was 36 years old. She had run away from her own wedding with a stranger. These facts did not necessarily combine into a narrative of stability, and she was self-aware enough to know it. She spent 2 evenings in the first week talking to her therapist, Dr. Margaret Calloway, who had the particular skill of asking exactly the right question and then waiting without impatience for the right answer to arrive. "What is it about him?" Dr. Calloway had asked in the first session. Emily had thought about it carefully. "He doesn't need anything from me," she said finally. "Not from my position or my company or my name. He doesn't know who I am in the way that people in my world know who I am as a function, as an asset, as someone useful. He heard me crying in an alley and came to see if I was okay." She paused. "When was the last time someone did something for me that had no strategic component whatsoever?" Dr. Calloway had written something. "And how does that feel?" "Terrifying. Emily said. And like something I've been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. She texted Daniel again on the 7th day and asked if she could come by. He said, Sophie has been asking about you. She wants to tell you about marine biology. I'll be there at 6. She brought a bag of groceries and a marine biology picture book that she had ordered online the day after her visit, and that had arrived that morning. Sophie received it with an 8-year-old's complete and uncomplicated delight, and they sat at the kitchen table together while Daniel cooked, and Sophie told Emily about anglerfish and bioluminescence, with the passionate authority of someone who has recently discovered that the ocean is extremely strange and has decided this is the best possible fact about the world. She suggested Central Park 2 weeks later, on a Saturday. It had snowed again the night before, a lighter fall than the wedding day snow. 2 or 3 inches that lay pristine on the paths and the lawn and the surface of the conservatory water. The model boat pond was not frozen, which Sophie had established by extensive research on her father's phone in the car, and which mattered because she had a remote-controlled sailboat from the previous Christmas that she had been waiting for the right opportunity to deploy. They stood at the edge of the water, and Sophie operated the boat with fierce concentration, and Daniel stood beside Emily with his hands in his coat pockets, and the 3 of them were, to anyone watching, entirely ordinary, a family in a park on a winter morning, which was not what they were, and also, in some way that Emily could not yet name, exactly what they were. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "That first morning, when you heard me in the alley, what made you come over? You could have gotten back in the car. Most people would have." He was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie navigate the boat around a floating leaf. "Claire used to say that the moments when you hesitate are the important ones, that your instinct already knows the right thing, and the hesitation is just fear." He paused. "I hesitated. Then I came over. Do you regret it?" He looked at her. The morning light was pale and even, the kind of light that makes everything look considered and deliberate. "No," he said, "not even a little." They bought hot chocolate from a cart near the Bethesda fountain, and they walked the path along the water's edge, and Sophie held her father's hand and then, without ceremony, reached out and took Emily's hand as well, and the 3 of them walked like that, Sophie swinging between them, chattering about the boat and the possibility of a dog and whether fish knew they were in water. And Emily felt something settle in her that she had not known was unsettled, something foundational and quiet, like the moment a building stops swaying. "She's extraordinary," Emily said later, when Sophie had run ahead to investigate a squirrel. "She is," Daniel said. "She's also better at Scrabble than me, which I find concerning. You let her win. I absolutely do not." "You do." He looked at her sideways. "Maybe sometimes." The gala was a mistake, and Emily knew it approximately 45 minutes before she invited him. It was Carter Technologies' annual winter event, 150 people in a venue in the meatpacking district, the kind of event that existed at the intersection of genuine business and elaborate performance. She had attended every year for a decade. She had always arrived with someone beside her who understood the room. She invited Daniel because she wanted him there. It was a simple reason, and she did not examine it carefully enough. He wore a suit that fit him well, dark navy, clearly pressed with care. He was the best-looking person in the room, by Emily's entirely unbiased assessment. But there was a quality to his stillness in that room that she could see reading, to people who traded in particular kinds of legibility, as out of place. The conversations around them moved in the language of acquisitions and valuations and keynote slots and industry relationships, and Daniel moved through it with the quiet courtesy of a very good man who finds himself in a country where he does not speak the language. Victor Aldridge was there. She had not known he would be. They had, apparently, mutual connections in the industry. Of course they did. They had been a couple for 2 years. Their social orbits had long since entwined. He was standing at the far end of the room with 2 men Emily vaguely recognized from the fintech space, and he saw her the moment she came in, and his eyes moved from her face to Daniel's, and a particular expression crossed his face, not anger, something worse than anger. The specific expression of a man who has decided to make a situation into a performance. He came over at the first opportunity. "Emily," he said. The warmth in his voice was something she could now identify as a technique. "I didn't know you'd be here with." He paused, in the way people pause when they intend the pause to do damage. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." "Daniel Hayes," Daniel said. He offered his hand. His voice was entirely even. "Victor Aldridge." Victor shook it with the particular grip of a man assessing. "And what is it you do, Daniel?" It was such a precise weapon that Emily felt it like a physical thing. The question carried everything Victor intended it to carry: the implication of irrelevance, the suggestion of hierarchy, the invitation to watch someone shrink. Daniel did not shrink. "I drive," he said, easily, with the absolute confidence of someone who has no investment in how the word lands. Victor smiled. "How interesting." He turned to Emily. "We should talk soon. There are a few business matters." "No," Emily said. Simply. Victor blinked. "I'm sorry? No, we shouldn't. We've said everything that needs to be said through the appropriate channels. Have a good evening, Victor." She turned away. Beside her, Daniel said nothing. They moved to the other side of the room and he got them both water from a passing tray, and she stood with her back to Victor Aldridge's direction and looked at a modernist landscape print on the wall and felt her heart rate slowly return to normal. "You okay?" Daniel asked. "Yes." "Then, I shouldn't have brought you here." "Why not?" "Because this isn't." She stopped. The room was the wrong place to say what she was about to say. "This isn't where you belong." That sounds wrong when I say it out loud. It sounds like you're telling me something true that you're not sure how to say. She turned to look at him. "I mean that this," she gestured vaguely at the room. "The event, the entire apparatus is a world I've been living in for 15 years, and I'm not sure it deserves that much of my loyalty anymore. And I don't want to drag you into something that isn't good for either of us, just because I'm still figuring out who I am outside of it." He was quiet for a moment. "That's fair," he said. "But I'm also capable of deciding for myself what's good for me." She held his gaze. "I know that. So tell me what you're actually afraid of." She thought about it. Really thought about it, standing in the middle of her company's gala with a glass of water. "That you'll see all of this and decide it's not worth the complication," she said. "That the distance between our lives is too large, and eventually you'll—" She stopped. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, quietly. "No drama in it. But I'm also not going to pretend the distance isn't real. It is. We'd both be lying if we said it wasn't." She looked at him for a long moment. "Real love doesn't need to be questioned," she said, echoing something he had said in the park. "No," he said. She made the announcement at the company's annual philanthropy review, 3 weeks into the new year. It was not the kind of announcement that ended careers or made headlines in the conventional sense. It was quieter than that, and more durable. She stood at the front of the room, 50 people, the company's core leadership team, plus a selection of community and nonprofit partners, and she said the following things. Substantially, that she had spent the previous year learning something about the difference between visible success and actual quality of life. That the lesson had arrived in an unexpected way. She did not detail it, but that it had been, in retrospect, among the most important things that had ever happened to her. That Carter Technology would be establishing a foundation, funded at $20 million over 5 years, dedicated to providing childcare support, educational resources, and emergency financial assistance to single-parent households. That the foundation would be named the Claire Hayes Fund, with the permission and blessing of the family it honored. She had asked Daniel before she had announced anything. She had asked him on a Tuesday evening in the apartment on Sackett Street, sitting at the kitchen table after Sophie had gone to bed, with a cup of tea getting cold between them and the marine biology book on the chair in the corner where Sophie had left it. She had explained what she wanted to do and why, and she had asked him carefully, directly, without framing it as a romantic gesture, because it was not principally a romantic gesture. It was a thing she believed in, that had grown out of a life she was beginning to understand she had never been living fully. He had been quiet for a long time. Then he had said, "Claire would have found this very funny. She spent 20 years thinking people like you didn't notice people like us." "I didn't," Emily said honestly. "I do now." He had said yes. She had not asked him to stand at the front of the room during the announcement, because he was not that kind of person. But he was in the room, near the back, standing with the particular stillness she had come to recognize as his presence grounded, warm, unmoved by the room's choreography. And when she finished speaking, she found his eyes across the crowd, and he looked at her with an expression that was not pride exactly, and not love exactly, but something that contained both and was larger than either. Sophie, who had been allowed to attend on the condition of good behavior and was sitting beside her father with her coat folded neatly in her lap, raised her hand. Daniel said, very quietly, "Not now, Soph." Sophie lowered her hand, then raised it again. Emily, from the front of the room, saw this exchange and could not help it. She smiled. "Go ahead, Sophie," she said. Sophie stood up, with the absolute unself-conscious confidence of an 8-year-old who has not yet learned to be embarrassed in public. "Is the foundation going to help kids whose moms are gone?" she asked. The room was very quiet. "Yes," Emily said, "especially them." Sophie nodded. "Good," she said, and sat back down. February brought another snowfall, lighter than December's, and a Sunday without obligations. They walked through Prospect Park, Daniel and Emily and Sophie, with the park mostly empty and the paths white and the trees bare against a pale sky. Sophie had her hood up and was collecting interesting sticks, which she described as the beginning of an architectural project whose full scope she had not yet determined. Daniel walked beside Emily, close enough that their arms brushed occasionally when the path narrowed. "She's going to build something elaborate," Emily said. "She builds elaborate things with sticks approximately once a month. I have 17 stick structures in the apartment." "Which two?" "The Eiffel Tower, obviously, and something she described as a grief house, which I didn't entirely understand but which felt important to preserve." Emily looked at him. "A grief house. We were reading a book about emotions. She decided that grief needed its own home." He paused. "She's not wrong." They walked for a while in the comfortable silence that had become one of the textures of being with him. A silence that was not absence, but presence, the particular quiet of two people who had learned they did not need to fill every moment with language. Emily had spent so much of her adult life filling silence with meetings and deliverables, and the constant, low-level noise of running a company that she had forgotten. Silence could feel like something other than a problem, to be solved. With Daniel, silence felt like trust. Like two people secure enough in each other's presence that they did not need the reassurance of sound. She thought about all the evenings she had spent in this city without knowing this was here. The park in winter, the slow, pale light, a man walking beside her who paid attention to the right things, and a child ahead conducting important research into stick architecture. She had been 2 miles away in a glass tower, while all of this quiet, warm, particular realness had simply been here the whole time. He was thinking, as he sometimes did when they walked in this park, about what Claire would have made of all of it. It was not a painful thought anymore. It was more like a private conversation he carried. She would have been funny about it, he thought. She would have found the story of the wedding dress and the Brooklyn coffee shop and Nora's wordless hospitality enormously entertaining. She would have liked Emily not for her company or her net worth, but for the specific quality that had been there in the alley outside the cathedral. The look of someone who had decided, at some real cost, to stop pretending. Claire had not had patience for pretending. She had always said that life was too interestingly strange to waste on performance, he thought. I am paying attention to the right things. She would recognize it. I was thinking, Emily said eventually, I'm going to sell the penthouse. He glanced at her. I'm not sure yet. She paused. Somewhere with a yard. Sophie mentioned, more than once, the possibility of a dog. Another pause, lighter. I thought maybe Carroll Gardens. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's a significant decision. Are you making it for the right reasons? She considered this seriously, because he was the kind of person who asked questions that deserved serious consideration. I'm making it because I have spent 15 years living at a distance from my own life, she said. Nice, clean, climate-controlled distance. And I don't want to do that anymore. She looked at him. The reasons include you. They're not limited to you. But yes, they include you. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. Sophie, 40 feet ahead, had paused to examine a particularly promising stick, and was completely absorbed. I'm not an easy situation, he said. A kid, a small apartment, a job that doesn't have a second line on a business card. Daniel, I'm being honest. I know. So am I. She turned to face him fully. I ran away from a wedding in a snowstorm with a stranger who gave me soup and let me borrow his sweatpants. I have not, in recent years, demonstrated an excess of conventional decision-making. He looked at her for a long, level moment, and then he smiled a real smile, the one she had learned to watch for, because it arrived slowly and stayed. No, he said. You really haven't. Sophie, at that moment, came running back down the path with 3 sticks and the focused expression of someone who has solved an important architectural problem. Dad, she announced, I'm going to need string. I don't have string. Emily might have string. I don't have string either, Emily said. Sophie looked at both of them with the serene patience of someone who has worked with limited materials before. We'll find string, she said, and turned and walked back toward the tree, entirely confident that the problem was solvable. They watched her go. She's right, you know, Emily said. We'll find string. Daniel reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had done it without a particular reason, not steadying her on icy pavement, not a moment of formal comfort, just his hand finding hers in the cold air of a February park because it belonged there, and they both knew it. Outside the park, the city moved with its regular noise and urgency and complication. Inside, in the quiet of February snow, the 3 of them walked on not toward a perfect life, because no such thing existed, but toward a real one, built from what they had survived and what they had chosen, and from the particular grace of paying attention to the right things. What real love requires is not perfection, not symmetry, not the same number of zeros in your bank account. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to stay when staying is not convenient. It requires the daily, unglamorous, indispensable act of choosing someone not in a cathedral with 300 witnesses, but in a park on an ordinary Sunday morning. In the middle of a light February snow, with a child collecting sticks 40 feet ahead, and the whole long quiet of the rest of your life still ahead of you. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it begins with a stranger who hears you crying and says, if you want to leave, I can take you out the back. Right now, and means it.